Hello, hello. Thank you everybody for being here today. Today we're lucky enough to get to speak with J.H. Moore, author of the fantastic Legend of Tawhiri. And there's so many things, so many positive things I have to say about this story. It's been a minute since I've read it myself, but it still sticks out to me, still stands out to me. And I think a lot of it has to do with representation and the cultural elements of it. And it's not really a culture I have much experience with, and it's not a society I have much experience with. And it was so cool to get kind of a hands-on experience at that, and that whole, for lack of a better word, a whole new world, a whole different type of mythology and lore and everything that went behind it. And yeah, no, just hats off to you. It felt like research had to be done, and I love the little what do you call it, little definitions at the beginning of the story as well. Really helps you kind
Thank
of
you.
get into the mindset of it.
Thank you.
Well, the place that I'd like to start with is something Ryan touched on briefly. So I made lots of notes as I was going through it. A lot of them initially were about the kind of mythological feel of it. I got the sense that there was a lot of mythology that had been built or taken from somewhere else and put in, and I couldn't tell where one started, the other ended. So tell me a little bit about the creation of the world, the archipelago, and everything. Where did it all start for this story?
Yeah. Well, I grew up overseas, a country called Papua New Guinea. A lot of people were not familiar with that when I was a child. You know, if I said Papua New Guinea, they'd be like, "Where is that?" I did pull from some other, Pacific Island myths as well. So, if you've watched Moana, you probably kind of have an idea of the feel
Mhm.
for it.
Mhm.
Um, and then also, a lot of it's just pulled from the cultures of my childhood. So the Rees specifically are based off of, basically the Papua New Guinean mermaid. Um, and there is a lot of just kind of like hints. A lot of it's not super specific. It's more I kind of try and take the feel for it and add it in. Papua New Guinea is animistic culture, so they don't necessarily have gods and goddesses. They do believe more in spirits. Um, so I tried to bring in some of that animism a little bit, but more so just the mentality of people who are living off the land, who are living at what they believe is a whim of beings that are more powerful than them, that care about how they behave, but not so much, and try and build that in. So I try and take the flavors without bringing too much specifics.
Mhm. Well, there is a huge sorry, Steve. There's a huge element of like community, and I think that's something that we can oftentimes forget living in more, say, Western societies and whatnot. Is that like you have people who do specific things within, and you have your elders, and you have this and that. There's hierarchy. There's a societal perspective and everything, and it was really cool to see that kind of fleshed out in a light where people might not adore their roles, but they recognize that they're for the greater good of whatever society they find themselves in.
And did you set out to write something that was more kind of mythical in tone, or did that, like, was that there from the beginning, kind of baked in, or did that style of writing kind of come out of the way that the story was being told?
What I set out to write was basically I needed a break. Life was difficult, but the type of fiction that I typically read, if someone's getting into my writing and is like, "Oh, I want more of this," I'm starting to be very disappointed. I tend to write like dark sci-fi and horror.
Oh,
So it's,
Nice.
and I do tend to write, when I write sci-fi, I like to have it be a little bit more on the hard side. So I like to bring in a lot of research. It's very, very intense as far as like gathering all that information and thinking things out. So I needed something that just kind of felt like home for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was missing home. So when I entered it, I wanted to really kind of get that feeling of being home again, not just in the culture and the community aspect and the mentality that comes with living in a village lifestyle, but kind of that carefreeness of being a child, of like all of your worries seem so huge and yet so small at the same time
Mhm.
because there's someone else who's taking care of things. So I wanted to have this ability to kind of relax into the world and enjoy it. My focus is more on wonder, and that's why I chose fantasy because I feel like most fantasy readers are more focused on wonder and on the emotions of being in a world and enjoying. One of the big things that Tahiri has is these moments where he's just like swimming in the ocean and you're just like, there goes a fish and another fish and another fish. And so it's very wonder driven. It's not the mythology was just kind of an avenue to be able to expand on that.
I think I wrote in my notes at one point. So if I'm reading a book that's like a proper comfort read, I'll usually describe it as like a warm mug of tea. Probably quite a Scottish way of saying it. But I wrote in my notes that this felt more like a cocktail on the beach, comfort, but with a very kind of different vibe. The kind of thing that you'd read in winter when you're missing the beach. It's cool that that was in it from the start because it did feel like a comfort story in a lot of ways, and I think the pacing, especially for me, I'm usually much more of a fan of like a faster paced page turner kind of book, and it's maybe that I'd been reading a bunch of them back to back, and this felt like you said, like going on holiday almost.
Mhm.
Just transport you away somewhere else, and there was no real rush to get through things. There was conflict, there was hooks. I was hooked from the start. But it wasn't like I was being pulled by my mouth against my will through the story.
Mhm.
It was a much nicer pace. I'm assuming that that was also like a deliberate kind of decision that you made as you were writing it.
Yeah, yeah. I actually recently had an audiobook done, and I told the
Oh, sweet.
narrator, I'm like, it needs to feel like a BBC documentary and a Ghibli movie kind of got together and had a kid. That's kind of what it felt like in my head. I really wanted now of course part of it is growing up. Life gets a little bit more hectic, but there really is a pace of life that comes with an island lifestyle that comes with being somewhere that's warm and where there's lots of food that's really well not readily available, but that you can find without too much heartache. With this kind of relaxed pace of life, and it's I wanted to fold that in that kind of island lifestyle, that island pace of life that just is it's more relaxed. It's not you're not and I apologize for all the noise. My cat has a zoomies all of a sudden. Um,
Oh, I can't hear him, but
Yeah.
I hope he's
oh,
having a good
good.
time.
That's good. um, but yeah, I really wanted to bring in that kind of relaxed lifestyle. I remember
Mhm.
um, when my youngest brother was born, we went over to Australia, Cairns, Australia, and everything was closed at the mall by like 3 or 4. And that just kind of shows like a more developed lifestyle mixed with this island mentality of like, hey, we want to go take a nap, we want to go relax. No one wants to keep working.
Mhm.
So why are we going to stay open till like 9 or 10, when we can close at 3?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. See, Steve, you guys have the island mentality all wrong in the UK.
It's the weather, man. It's the weather.
But there was something about it when it comes down to, and it could be because it was in part a coming of age story, in part you really push the kind of innocence of youth and everything. And I think as you were saying, like as you get older, life gets more complicated, whether by design or not. But I do like that element of because I went to the coast last weekend and I have like this kind of idea of just like it's not that deep. Like it's never that deep. You can just like go out and enjoy yourself, and it doesn't need to be this big thing. You can just enjoy the day and take it all one step at a time. And I think it's stories like these that help remind you of that. Like even though even though Tahiri wasn't where he wanted to be, and he knew by design he wasn't going to be able to get to where he wanted to be, he was still like, I'm gonna go build this hut. And then carried on about his day, much to the chagrin of his was it grandmother? Forgive me if I got it wrong. Uh,
Uma.
yeah,
Yeah.
which I
More or
appreciated.
less.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is especially in Western cultures, there's this demand that comes with, making something of yourself, which
Mhm.
it is both good and horribly taxing and demanding. The
Hmm.
idea that, we live in this culture where we have so much available and yet we still have these skyrocketing suicide and mental health um, illness rates because there's just so
Hmm.
much demand put on us. And that doesn't mean we should all, go run off and live on an island. There's definitely different demands and different stresses that come with that as well. But yeah, when there's, only so much you can go, so far you can go when you live in a, island tribe. You're not going to go to college and become a doctor, so
Hmm.
less stress.
Maybe
Yeah.
return to the ocean and become a god,
Exactly,
down
you
the
could do
spirit
that.
slowly.
So then I did a tiny bit of research. Is the Legend of Tahiri is Tahiri a figure outside of this story?
I do believe there is. I believe in New Zealand there's a cultural mythological figure that shares the name. I didn't specifically take that from there.
Hmm.
Um, it was just, I think growing up in a culture with similar, languages, there's certain, when coming up with names and things like that, it was just something that I pulled. Um, so, I looked into it a little bit, but I didn't want to dig too much in. I think as a third culture kid, there's this weird like middle ground where I sit in where, it's not my culture and yet it is my culture. So I definitely wanted to be inspired by it, but I didn't want to try, especially, in countries and cultures where I had never been before. I didn't want to pull directly from them and be like, here, I'm going to make this mine now.
Right. I can identify with that. I get that. Huh.
When we talk about pulling things from other places,
Yeah.
something I was curious about was what kind of writers and like what kind of inspirations you kind of draw from when it comes to things like style and how you tell your stories. Because I made notes when I was going through it. I picked up a little bit of Michael Morpurgo. I wasn't sure about that, but I wanted to see if that was in there. And I did make another note that said Pacific Percy Jackson, but that that didn't last that long. Then I was like, it's not going in the same direction. But I thought it was going that way. But was there anything in particular that kind of that you base your style off of, or that you drew on heavily for this?
Um, so as far as like actual writing style, like the words I choose and stuff like that, I have worked really hard to kind of build my own style. Um, and I know there's definitely influences that I draw off of, but as anyone who has read a lot as a kid understands, there's no way you can like sit down and be like, oh yeah, I took this from here, I took this from here. Um, as far as like, storytelling wise, two stories that I really drew from a lot, which might be surprising. One of them is, and I always get the title wrong because I'm so bad with numbers. 20,000 Leagues, I believe, Under the Sea.
Oh yeah, yeah, well
Um,
done, yeah.
so while reading it, there was these long periods of time where, the main characters would just stop and stand in front of a window and just catalog the fish and the animals they saw go by. And I'm like, look, if you can do this and still have a compelling story, like this is what I want to do. So I definitely drew from that and thought about that. And also, Papua New Guinea does come up in that story,
Yeah.
not in the most flattering way,
Yeah.
Oh
um,
man, yeah.
but they talk about the drunk birds of paradises and the cannibals, which we had a cannibal in our village. He was a great guy. He used to come up for peanut butter sandwiches, um, but he hadn't been a cannibal for a very long time. His name was Paki now. He's one of the oldest guys in the village. But yeah, definitely, kind of that idea of like of just exploring and that spirit of exploring. The other one that I drew from was Mutiny on the Bounty. There is this passage in Mutiny on the Bounty, and I think it's the first time I remember reading a story and being able to be like, oh yeah, I see myself here. Because he was describing life, I believe it was in Tahiti where he was.
Okay.
And it's based on a true story. It's a fictional story, but it's based on true events. So he was describing Tahiti and how beautiful it was, and his life among the islanders there. He got married to a Tahitian woman, and he was describing the different foods, and it really just felt like going home to me. And then at the end of the story, he comes back and everything's just been destroyed and colonized, and it doesn't feel like the home that he grew to love. And I don't remember if his wife was remarried or dead, but it was just kind of taken away from him. Um, and and I wanted to go back and kind of get that feeling of like, oh yeah, this is home. Like this feels right. This is where I belong.
Mhm. It
I think
sounds to
it's
me, I'm maybe picking up a pattern here that doesn't exist, but correct me if I'm wrong. Do you quite like books about boats or like the
Books about
sea
boats?
generally?
Yes.
Yeah, I
I
love
mean,
a good boat.
I grew up on the ocean, but I
Yeah.
also grew up growing up as a missionary kid. Missionaries had two kinds of books. There's Louis L'Amour, and there was Christian romance. And I didn't like. I went through my phases with both of them.
mm,
Yeah.
But as a result, I just went to the high school library and took out all the classics. And of course, when you're young, all the classics you want are, the adventures. You want Treasure
Yeah.
Island, and you want some boats, and you want some, swashbuckling. And yeah, so I definitely went through
Mhm.
my phase. And they still like really call to me, it's,
mm,
Yeah,
yeah,
Treasure Island's a timeless classic. There's
yeah.
all the good old boat adventure, pirate adventure stories. I know that you
exactly.
got some pirates in Tahiri. We get some
Yeah,
pirates.
Yep.
that they made a cameo that I did not expect. I think that was part of it, was that the story was leading one direction, then lo and behold, pirates showed up. Spoilers, pirates arrive. Uh Pirates show up, and I was intrigued. It was interesting to see, because then it is also that element of you're living in this paradise, but you're isolated. And I
Hmm.
imagine throughout society and throughout history, a lot of people felt like they were living in their paradise until someone from afar came and ruined it for everybody. So it was interesting to see that dynamic, um, just from like also a colonization perspective as well.
Yeah. And I think for me, for every writer, when you sit down and write a book, especially if you're writing to publish, you do keep in mind your reader, but the story is for you first and foremost. And for me, the story was about being that third culture kid. And so most of my characters in any book end up kind of being like stuck between two worlds. And that was definitely pronounced with Tahiri, is he didn't belong in the village, and he didn't belong, with the mer people either. He was kind of stuck in between, and he wasn't able to like fully belong. But there's also that sense of loss of like you have this beautiful golden perfect childhood where everything makes sense, and you're around other people who understand you, other third culture kids, and you're in a culture, and you're in a found family, and you're in a group, and then something comes and it takes that away. And so having those pirates show up and having that kind of clash of the outside world, just really for me was kind of talking about, hey, you're living this wonderful childhood where everything made sense, and now all of a sudden nothing makes sense anymore. And how are you going to live your life in context to that, to create a life of impact and integrity, um and to have it mean something when nothing, all the context that you grew up in just gets taken away. So yeah, I definitely wanted that kind of encroachment of the outside.
Mm.
Yeah. It reminded me a little bit of the. Have you ever seen Apocalypto?
I've not, no, I've heard about it.
It's set in the Aztec Empire's fall, and the whole movie's set during the Aztec time. And at the end of it, the last shot is like the Spanish off the coast, and the guys are like, "Oh, cool, what's that?" But you're like, "Oh no, things are about to get really, really bad for everyone." Like it's the end of one world and the start of another as these kind of worlds and cultures collide,
And
which
that's
historically
Yeah.
not been great for
As I'm
most people
saying, and
involved.
that's kind of historically, it's like it almost feels inevitable. Like you can enjoy your window, and like that's live in the present, enjoy it. But unfortunately, with the way society was trending and this and that, like you're going to be discovered eventually. Like your little pockets. I know like I like going out, like I like hiking and everything. Some of the places that bring me a lot of joy, we gatekeep them. We don't necessarily share where they are, what they are, because we know that eventually people will find out, and then it'll get busy and it'll take away from what it was, which, is controversial in and of itself, but there comes a point where it's to what extent can you protect the things that the things that are meaningful to you and your culture, your society, everything, and to what extent should you open it up to the world? And will it be
Tragedy
respected
of the
once you
commons, right?
do? What was that? Sorry, Steve.
It's the tragedy of the commons.
Is it? I've never heard the term. I'm
You've
sorry.
never heard that
Yeah.
before?
Explain it. It sounds interesting.
The tragedy of the commons is the what you just described, that they make the commons look really nice, like a commons like a big park. They make the commons all nice, everyone looks after it, they garden it and everything, so everyone wants to come to it, so everyone hears about it and everyone comes to it and ruins it, and now the people that started it have lost what they initially built because it
Mm.
was so nice everyone wanted to come and see it. Big
Yeah.
metaphor.
Yeah, no, it's a big
So,
metaphor.
Jill, I was not. We'll get into spoilers, right? Because I mean, we've already spoiled the pirates. But if you've made it this far, fucking
It's a
spoilers. Go
simple
read the book.
story. You can't
Yeah.
really talk too much without spoilers.
But I was curious then how your own experience then affected the ending, and if that was always the plan. Because obviously, in the end, Tahiri's torn between these two worlds, and at the end, he's like, "I ain't got to choose." Kind of goes his own way, makes his own path. Was that based on your own experience as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been in the States now longer than I was in Papua New Guinea. I would probably, I'd love to go visit home. I still call it home. There's this joke among missionary kids that, wherever we stay, whether it's a hotel or a stranger's house or whatever, that's home because we're sleeping there. But there's only one big H home. Um, and for me, that's Papua New Guinea. There's I don't know, it's kind of like Frodo at the end of the Lord of the Rings. Like you can't ever go back. And all of us experience that with our childhoods, as you grow up, you lose things, you leave things behind, people pass away, Blockbuster closes, what have you.
Blockbuster
Um,
closes.
Well, okay, okay. We say that. I live in Oregon. Blockbuster has not closed. We have one left.
okay, Blockbuster closed everywhere but Oregon. Um, but yeah, so we all experience that. But as
Mhm,
someone who kind of lives in the in between, uh, America is never going to be home. It's never going to feel like home.
mhm.
It's never going to make sense. I'm always my roommate and close friend calls me socially weird. I don't jive with most people, and
Yeah.
just because we're not on the same wavelength, we have different
Hmm.
experiences. Um, there's there's never going to be a time and a place, and I don't think any of us will, but there's never going to be a time and a place where I fully feel like I belong, because what I belong to is a mixture of two things. It's not its own separate thing. And addressing that with Tahiri, of being able to find his own identity, but more importantly, to find an identity that was not isolated and cut him off from community. Because for a lot of people, especially here in the States, we have this kind of mentality. I actually think the movie Coco did an incredible job discussing this as well. This idea of like, I'm gonna abandon everything and find what makes me me and find my identity, and it's gonna be separate from all these other things. But we were created to live in community. We were created to have mothers and fathers and friends and brothers and children, and to have this blending of all of the different experiences from different lifestyles, from different generations. As much as we talk about, for instance, colonization being horrible, I definitely am not an isolationist. I believe that human beings, we are the greatest resource. Um, and And in order to tap into that resource, instead of exploiting other people, we need to live in community and family with each other. We need to build those relationships. So it was important to me to be able to find a balance with Tahiri where, yes, he found his own identity and he made his own purpose and he became his own definition of a man because he still wasn't technically a man by the end of the
Yeah.
story. But to be able to do it in a way in which his culture and his people acknowledged and understood, and it didn't require severing those relationships. They look different, and things always look different as we grow up and as we move through different contexts in our lives. But to cut himself off of that, I think would have been a tragic ending.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it was almost bittersweet, I thought, when it got to the end. And I
Yeah.
was glad it didn't go all the way into, yeah, he's just going to abandon, like, he's just going to with more people now, you know? I thought it was a really nice ending. It wasn't like sickly sweet. It wasn't like everything's fine, but it was nice and it was like a nice resolution to it all that felt kind of true to life.
I was gonna say it left me feeling like the story had reached a completion, but at the same time, you knew that there was more going on. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't that the world had ended or whatnot. Like you knew that more problems were gonna arise, but it felt like they were in a better foot. They were in a better place to then deal with that once it came about.
Yeah, and I do, I've worked as a developmental editor and a critique partner. And I always tell people who I'm working with in their writing, stories are about choice and they're about change. And every time we experience change, change does have this bittersweet aspect to it where, even like Tahiri is adopted. My sister is adopted. A lot of my family members are adopted. Adoption is this beautiful thing where you build a family out of people who are not technically family, but in doing so, there's the tragedy of breaking family that should have been. So there's this aspect of change, whether it's growing up, whether it's, changing a job, whether it's, um, moving where you're both losing something and gaining something. And so I definitely wanted that at the end of the story to have that openness of like, yeah, he's definitely lost something. Um, and I wanted you to feel that loss. But at the same time, he's built something else that, we're not going to compare it and say it's better or worse, but it's
Right.
beautiful in its own right.
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely. I think that's a really good summation of the kind of tone and the vibe that I got from a lot of the book. I
Mhm.
think that comes through beautifully. So
Well,
I'm aware that time is ticking and we don't have too long left. So there's a quick one that I wanted to get in. This is going to be ridiculous, so bear with me. When I was talking about some of the influences that I saw, you're not a Lego aficionado or anything, are you, Joe?
Not in a long time.
No, I did
As a
catch little hints
kid,
of Bionicle lore in here in places, and I know Ryan probably knows what I'm
I
talking
know
about.
exactly what you're talking about.
But I figured out before I came to this question that it's more that the Bionicle lore pulls a lot from Pacific Island kind of lore and stuff. So it's I've got the order wrong of the inspirations here.
well, I mean, it could be a little bit of both because my sister, her older sister, was obsessed with Bionicle. I think she still
Yeah.
has her. She's very A-type. She still has her
Yeah.
original Bionicle, like
Oh,
built and
nice.
in their like little like time capsules there. So we definitely watched lots of Bionicle movies and stuff. I can't remember hardly anything from it, but yeah, I mean, there's some shared ground there.
One of the things I wanted to ask, because we got 4 minutes left, so we gotta move a little fast, and I feel like this is self-explanatory, but did writing this feel therapeutic? Did writing this feel cathartic to you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I've recently been diagnosed with CPTSD,
Mhm.
complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and I was just in a place in my life where I needed to mourn and
Mhm.
to recognize some losses and still see like, hey, there's still hope for a future. There's still something beautiful that's ahead. Healing is possible.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I just needed a break. So that's why
Yeah.
it feels like a vacation.
That's fair. I mean, it's a good story to read on like either a rainy day or a sunny day. It has its moments, especially with his adopted mother, grandmother, how we want to go about it. Like it felt nice. And I think
Thank you.
that showed. But with the last 3 minutes left, for people who liked The Legend of Tahiri and they want to read more of your work, I know you said it's very different to other stories that you've written and whatnot. What would you recommend they start with? Well, where do we go from here?
Also, tell me about the
Uh,
Raven Free Society. What's the Raven
oh,
Free Society? I need to know. I've seen loads of them, and I was like, that looks like my kind of thing.
absolutely. So I'll discuss both. So what I would recommend, um, and I recommend this to pretty much anyone starting my stuff. I do have a short story collection. Um, sorry, I have cats joining me. Um, excuse me. I do have a short story collection. A lot of them are really old and not particularly good. I think, especially in the fantasy, because I tend more towards science fiction. But if you enjoy the boat aspects, there's definitely actually I think is the first science fiction one is based off of it's a boat, the spaceship which turns into a boat on a
Excellent.
on an ocean
Two of my favorite things.
planet.
That is right up my alley. Yeah.
And then there's also, orphans stuck in a submarine in like a diesel punk world,
So,
trying to escape that. So there are stories in there that would be a little bit more up your,
What
up
is
the same
what is
alley.
the name? What is the name of this?
Uh, the the name of it is Under the Ancient and Ageless Skies. So I just put that out. I put that out this year.
Oh, exciting.
Time has no meaning anymore.
No, it doesn't.
Um, So yeah, you should be able to find that. I'm not entirely sure if it's on Amazon, but I do know it is under JH Moore. Um, so that's what I would recommend, especially if you're looking for something that is not going to have swearing, excessive violence,
mhm.
or like too much like me sitting and talking about science for 10, 11 pages. Um,
And just
so go ahead.
I was just gonna say we have 50 seconds left before Zoom cuts us off. So I'm just gonna speed
Okay.
run this real quick. I'm so sorry for interrupting you.
No, no, go for it.
If readers want to find you, follow you on social media or whatnot, what's the best way they can? Do you have a website? Do you have Instagram? We'll put it all in the description.
Unfortunately, I'm kind of taking a hiatus from publishing at the moment. I say Twitter is probably the best place to find me, and then you can also find a link to my Discord, and that's where I go first for things
Yeah.
now. So,
Amazing. Well, with that, thank you again so much for taking part. I hope you're feeling better from the flu. And
no,
if
thank
you've
you.
managed to watch this far and forget, it's The Legend of Tahiri by J.H. Moore. Thank you all, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah,
Good
thank you.
pleasure.
Take care, guys.